Happy Tuesday, everyone. We had a tie between our two read aloud books, and the two top choices were Gregor the Overlander and The Restart. So we've got these two books to choose from. So I'm going to try to quickly read the first chapter of each book and give you a chance to decide which one you'd rather hear to help narrow it down. So here is the first chapter of Gregor the Overlander. It's called Part 1, The Fall. Chapter 1. Gregor had pressed his forehead against the screen for so long he could feel a pattern of tiny checks above his eyebrows. He ran his fingers over the bumps and resisted the impulse to let out a primal caveman scream. It was building up in his chest, that long guttural howl reserved for real emergencies, like when you ran into a saber-toothed tiger without your club, or your fire went out during the Ice Age. He even went so far as to open his mouth and take a deep breath before he banged his head back into the screen with a quiet sound of frustration. Ugh. What was the point anyway? It wouldn't change one thing. Not the heat, not the boredom, not the endless space of summer laid out before him. He considered waking up Boots, his 2-year-old sister, just for a little distraction, but he let her sleep. At least she was cool in the air-conditioned bedroom she shared with their 7-year-old sister, Lizzie, and their grandma. It was the only air-conditioned room in the apartment. On really hot nights, Gregor and his mother could spread quilts on the floor to sleep. But with 5 in the room, it wasn't cool, just lukewarm. Gregor got an ice cube from the freezer and rubbed it on his face. He stared out at the courtyard where a stray dog sniffed around an overflowing trash can. The dog set its paws on the rim, tipping the can and sending the garbage spewing across the sidewalk. Gregor caught a glimpse of a couple of shadowy shapes scurrying along the wall and grimaced. Rats! He never really got used to them. Otherwise, the courtyard was deserted. Usually it was full of kids playing ball, jumping rope, or swinging around the creaky jungle gym. But this morning, the bus had left for camp, and every kid between the ages of 4 and 14 had been on it, except one. "I'm sorry, baby, you can't go," his mother had told him a few weeks ago. And she really had been sorry, too. He could tell by the look on her face. "Someone has to watch Boots while I'm at work, and we both know your grandma can't handle it anymore." Of course he knew it. For the last year, his grandma had been slipping in and out of reality. One minute she was clear as a bell, and the next she was calling him Simon. Who was Simon? He had no idea. It would have been different a few years ago. His mom only worked part-time then, and his dad, who taught high school science, was off in the summer. He'd have taken care of Boots, but since his dad disappeared one night, Gregor's role in the family had changed. He was the oldest, so he'd picked up a lot of the slack. Looking after his little sisters was a big part of that. So all Gregor said was, "That's okay, Mom. Camp's for kids anyway." He shrugged to show that, at 11, he was past caring about things like camp. But somehow that made her look even sadder. "Do you want Lizzie to stay home with you? Give you some company?" she asked. A look of panic had crossed Lizzie's face at the suggestion. She probably would have burst into tears if Gregor hadn't refused the offer. "Nah, let her go. I'll be fine with Boots." So here he was. Not fine, spending the whole summer cooped up with a 2-year-old and his grandma, who thought he was someone named Simon, he heard his grandma call from the bedroom. Gregor shook his head, but he couldn't help smiling a little. "Coming, Grandma," he called back and crunched down the rest of his ice cube. A golden glow filled the room as the afternoon sunlight tried to force its way through the shades. His grandma lay on the bed, covered by a thin cotton quilt. Every patch on the quilt had come from a dress she had made herself throughout the years. In her more lucid moments, she'd talk Gregor through the quilt. "This polka-dotted Swiss I wore to my cousin Lucy's graduation when I was 11. This lemon yellow was a Sunday dress, and this white is, in actual fact, a corner of my wedding dress. I do not lie." This, however, was not a lucid moment. "Simon," she said, her face showing relief at the sight of him, "I thought you forgot your lunch pail. You'll get hungry plowing." His grandma had been raised on a farm in Virginia and had come to New York when she married his grandfather. She had never really taken to it. Sometimes Gregor was secretly glad that she could return to that farm, at least in her mind. And a little envious. It wasn't any fun sitting around their apartment all the time. By now the bus would probably be arriving at camp and Lizzie and the rest of the kids would... "Kiko!" squeaked a little voice. A curly head popped over the side of the crib. "Me out!" Boots stuck the soggy end of a stuffed dog's tail in her mouth and reached up both arms to him. Gregor lifted his sister high in the air and blew a loud raspberry on her stomach. She giggled, and the dog fell to the floor, and he set her down to retrieve it. "Take your hat," said Grandma, still somewhere back in Virginia. Gregor took her hand to try to focus her attention. "Do you want a cold drink, Grandma? How about a root beer?" She laughed. "A root beer? What is it, my birthday?" How do you answer something like that? Gregor gave her hand a squeeze and scooped up Boots. "I'll be right back," he said loudly. His grandma was still laughing to herself. "A root beer," she said, and wiped her eyes. In the kitchen, Gregor filled a glass with icy root beer and made Boots a little bottle of milk. "Cold," she beamed, pressing it to her face. "Yes, nice and cold, Boots," said Gregor. A knock on the door startled him. The peephole had been useless for a good 40 years. He called through the door. "Who is it?" "It's Mrs. Komachi, darling. I told your mother I'd sit with your grandma at 4, a voice called back. Then Gregor remembered the pile of laundry he was supposed to do. At least he'd get out of the apartment. He opened the door to find Mrs. Komachi looking wilted in the heat. "Hello, you! Isn't it awful? I tell you, I do not suffer heat gladly." She bustled into the apartment, patting her face with an old bandana. "Oh, you dream! Is that for me?" she said, and before he could answer, she was gulping down the root beer like she'd been lost in the desert. "Sure," Gregor mumbled, heading back to the kitchen to fix another. He didn't really mind Mrs. Komachi, and today was almost a relief to see her. Great, day 1, and I'm looking forward to a trip to the laundry room, Gregor thought. By September, I'll probably be ecstatic when we get the phone bill. Mrs. Komachi held out her glass for a refill. "So, when are you going to let me read your tarot, mister? You know I've got the gift," she said. Mrs. Komachi posted signs by the mailboxes offering to read tarot cards for people at $10 a shot. "No charge for you," she always told Gregor. He never accepted because he had a sneaking suspicion Mrs. Komachi would end up asking a lot more questions than he would. Questions he couldn't answer. Questions about his dad. He mumbled something about the laundry and hurried off to collect it. Knowing Mrs. Komachi, she probably had a deck of tarot cards right in her pocket. Down in the laundry room, Gregor sorted clothes as best he could. Whites, darks, colors. What was he supposed to do with Boots' black and white striped shorts? He tossed them in the darks, feeling like it was probably the wrong decision. Most of their clothes were kind of grayish anyway. From age, not bad laundry choices. All Gregor's shorts were just his winter pants cut off at the knees. And he only had a few t-shirts that fit from last year. What did it matter if he was going to be locked in the apartment all summer? Boys and girls, this chapter is pretty long, so I'm going to stop there. And I don't have a bookmark, but I'm going to put it right here. So that is the first part of Gregor the Overlander. That's the first 8 pages. It's pretty good so far. I have trouble with the voices, so if I pick this book, you're going to laugh as the voices change over time, because it's tricky to try to keep those voices. I can't quite pick what voice Mrs. Komachi should have, so we'll work on that. Alright, so this is Restart. And I feel like this video is long, so I'm going to do Restart in a separate video, just in case you want to tune out for a little while. So watch for Restart in the next video. See you later.